Ned Buntline. 200 years ago today, on March 20th, 1821, Edward Zane Carroll Judson was born. Under the pen name Ned Buntline, he first wrote the stories that brought Texas Jack and Buffalo Bill into the proverbial spotlight, and then convinced them to stand before the actual spotlight as the Scouts of the Prairie, a play he wrote for them in 4 hours in December of 1872. Before meeting the pair of Western Scouts at Fort McPherson, Nebraska, Buntline led a life just as full of adventure as the men he would someday make famous. Ed Judson ran away from home when he was 13 years old after his father hit him during an argument, and he joined the crew of a merchant vessel as a cabin boy. He curried some favor and earned a commission from President Martin Van Buren when he rescued the crew of a boat that had been damaged in a mishap with a ferry on New York's East River. He served in the Second Seminole War in Florida, but he saw little action. Frustrated and bored, Ned resigned from his Navy commission. The lasting legacy of his time as a sailor would be the use of the pseudonym Buntline, buntlines being the ropes used to lift the middle portion of a ship's sail. The Civil War roused him to action again, and he rose to the rank of sergeant with the 1st New York Mounted Rifles, before receiving a dishonorable discharge from Grant's army for drunkenness. Later in life, he would take to calling himself colonel, a rank to which he never rose. The loss of his military job forced Buntline to rely on a proficiency with the pen with which he had supplemented his income most of his adult life. He saw his first story published in the Knickerbocker in 1838 when he was just 17 years old. Buntline took this as a sign that he was made for journalism and traveled around the East Coast starting multiple newspapers that inevitably failed. In each city, and with each failure, he chose to move on rather than face bankruptcy and angry debtors. After one such failure in Cincinnati, he fled to Kentucky, where he was awarded a $600 bounty for single-handedly capturing 2 wanted murderers. He took this money to the Athens of the South, Nashville, Tennessee, to start another paper, this time called Ned Buntline's Own. Soon after arriving in Nashville, Buntline romanced and wooed the teenaged wife of a man named Robert Porterfield. The slighted Mr. Porterfield challenged the philandering Buntline to a duel. Buntline accepted this challenge, shooting and killing Porterfield. At the subsequent trial, Porterfield's brother rose in court, produced a gun, and fired at Buntline. Finding his initial injury non-fatal and unwilling to wait around for a more lethal wound, Buntline used the ensuing chaos in the courtroom to escape police custody. An angry lynch mob of the late Mr. Porterfield's friends tracked and captured Buntline and hung him from a nearby awning, but a second mob of Ned's own friends came along just in time to cut him down and save his life. Deciding that angry lynch mobs, vengeful brothers of adulterous mistresses' husbands, and warm southern summers somewhat disagreed with him, Buntline relocated back to the Northeast, where he had recently earned $100 writing a violent pirate adventure novel called The Black Avenger of the Spanish Main or The Fiend of Blood. The story would become so universally known as a children's book that Mark Twain included a reference to it in his own books, with Tom Sawyer imagining himself as Buntline's Black Avenger. In New York, Buntline jumped straight into the growing unrest between recent immigrants, angry nativists, and the rich upper class that owned the city police. These two sides chose as unlikely champions 2 actors, Edwin Forrest and William Charles Macready. Forrest was the first real American acting star. Macready was the most successful actor in England. When Forrest had portrayed Macbeth in London, the British crowd hissed him off the stage, unhappy to see an American portraying the title character in Shakespeare's Scottish play. Forrest believed that his unfavorable reception was instigated by Macready's professional jealousy. Returning the favor a few weeks later, Forrest stood up in his private booth while attending Macready's portrayal of Hamlet and hissed loudly. The British press, as well as theater fans on the island, were understandably upset. When Macready appeared as Macbeth at the Astor Opera House in New York on May 10, 1849, Ned Buntline, in his capacity as assistant to Tammany Hall political boss Captain Isaiah Ridners, set up a line of people equipped with heavy stones to throw at the theater. The unruly crowd eventually attempted to start a fire inside the opera house. This led to a direct conflict with the police, which quickly erupted into a full-scale riot. The police were not as well armed as Buntline and the rioters, and called for backup from the state militia. The militia arrived, issued several warnings which were unheard over the din of rioters and theatergoers, and began to shoot into the crowd from point-blank range, leaving 25 dead and over 120 people, mostly working-class civilians, injured. This was the first time in America that the state militia had shot into a crowd of civilians, and the incident led directly to the creation of an armed and organized police force. For his part in instigating the deadly riot, Buntline was fined $250 and sentenced to a year in prison. When he was released in September of 1850, he began writing sensationalized stories for New York's weekly newspapers, earning as much as $20,000 a year for the next few years. This didn't stop him from inciting another nativist riot in St. Louis after he joined the Native American Party, which he nicknamed the Know-Nothings. Skipping bail in St. Louis, Buntline returned to writing and raising the ire of some of the most well-connected families in New York City. In the late 1860s, he embarked on a series of paid lectures on the benefits of temperance, drinking heavily the entire way. These lectures took him for a long extended stay in California before return visits through Nevada, Utah, and the Midwest. Often he would stop in a town, hit the local saloon, and then set up outside the same saloon to warn patrons against the excesses brought on by the evil drink. It was on one of these temperance lecture trips that Buntline sought Wild Bill Hickok and found Buffalo Bill Cody and Texas Jack Omohundro. For more information on the amazing life of Ned Buntline, check out the book The Notorious Life of Ned Buntline by Julia Bricklin, the true story of the man who, more than anyone else, wrote the Wild West into being.